Okay, so thank you very much for joining us. So you're here with the Throughcare team from Action Against Stalking. My name's Jen and I'm the Throughcare manager. And we thought that we would do a kind of back to basics because so much is misunderstood about stalking. So I have got a kind of question and answer session with Amanda where she is one of our frontline practitioners and she is going to give us kind of her perspective on stalking and what she sees with her clients. So let's start right from the top, Amanda, and tell me a bit about, imagine you meet someone on the street, they ask you what you do for a job. How would you describe stalking?
Stalking is a conduct of behavior. And these behaviors consist of legal and sometimes illegal behaviors. These behaviors are fixated, they're obsessive, they're unwanted, and they're repeated. And they instill fear and or alarm in the recipient of these behaviors. And although there's a lot of sort of dubiety around the world of what constitutes stalking, there is an agreement that it is repeated, it is obsessive, it is fixated, and it is certainly unwanted. And that, in our view, is what constitutes stalking.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the most important things you said there is that quite a lot of the behaviors in isolation aren't illegal.
They really are not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these types of behaviors consist of unwanted gifts. They consist of takeaways being sent to your home, text messages, emails, just repeated attempts at contact through social media, fake media accounts, contact through third parties is quite common these days. And that could be approaching family and friends, could be approaching workplace colleagues, tracking the target. And what we're seeing quite commonly in and amongst these behaviors are false allegations. And that's just another third party sort of contact. And false allegations can happen at your workplace. They can happen through your family and friends. They can happen to police, animal welfare, charities, and anything sort of like that. And these are the most common behaviors associated that we deal with in our stalking cases.
And when the client comes into you, so they've contacted the service, we've decided that they're experiencing stalking and we're the right people to support them. What's the most common pieces of advice that you tend to give them?
Well, there really is a set of advice that we do follow. And before we take that step in starting to advise and help the client come to sort of safety plans and things like that, we have to really look at rebuilding confidence and resilience. And we do that, first of all, by listening and believing. And secondly, by that listening, we start to understand some really important areas in their situation. And these areas are the dynamics between the stalker and the target. So understanding what the relationship is, or if there is not one. Any communications that have been happening and how that's unfolding between them. We then look at sort of a typology assessment. So what type of stalker are we dealing with? We do have very set typologies that we work from that have been researched and really proven successful. So once we understand the dynamics and the typology, that helps us to understand the risk level that the recipient of these behaviors is in. Once we understand the risk level, then we start to get into advice, first and foremost, safety. Safety is paramount. Once we deal with safety, then we start to look at rebuilding with the client control over their life. So starting to expand their world, because stalking behaviors can really reduce a recipient's world greatly. Mm-hmm. And through that, they then start to build their resilience, and then they start to recover and take control back. And that's what we look at when we first start to do these things.
And what would you say is what would you say is the most sort of common typology that you deal with?
Yeah, the most common typology is resentful. Mm-hmm. And resentful can fall under domestic abuse. It can fall under friends, neighbors, family members, and that seems to be the largest typology we're dealing with. The most common is a domestic abuse. It's an ex-intimate. That takes about 65% of stalking cases, but that's not necessarily anybody can become a stalker, as anyone can become a victim. But resentful is certainly the largest that I deal with in my client case.
And you talked a little bit about safety planning. Can you tell us more about, because I think that's a word that we use quite a lot, but maybe other people don't quite understand what it is. So what is how would you talk someone through a safety plan, and what kind of things would that involve?
Right. Safety planning it really is one of the most foremost and paramount parts of a recipient of these behaviors becoming safe. It's looking at CCTV in their property, because property damage is another common stalking behavior. Ring doorbells, door wedges, window alarms. And these are more confident building than they are actual protecting them. Once you know your home is secure, you're more likely to sleep better. Sleeping better allows more control, clear thinking, and again, resilience. So we look at anything that can help them build that control back in their life. I always recommend personal alarms to be carried at all times. Work, friends, and family to be made aware of their situation, particularly at work. If things are starting to move into their workplace and they're contacting work, one important safety measure is to have sort of the front line of your workplace aware of who the stalker is, and even to show a picture if you possibly can, so that if it is approached, 999 can be called immediately. It could also include having somebody walk to your car when you're finished work. So these are the sorts of things that we look at, any immediate safety measures. If they're following in vehicles and sort of following and tracking, then we would suggest dash cams put in and that sort of thing. And in combination with these safety plans like CCTV, the Ring doorbells, I also recommend if they're walking on their own, if they're like to walk their dog or hill walk, that they always have their phone ready to record. So it's also able for them to call 999 if necessary, but most importantly, that's going to help them gather evidence. And that's a big part of our first initial part of advice as well. Evidence is extremely important. And once we get the safety planning in place, we then look at how do we evidence what is happening to them, because that's one of the most difficult parts of stalking, is getting the evidence so the police can take action. So when we talk evidence, we want to look at how do we also communicate the big picture to the police. So many times the clients have been told to close their social media accounts, delete their messages, block their stalker. We do not recommend this. We don't recommend it for two reasons. Number one, you're losing very valuable evidence from all the contact and showing the conduct and big picture of behavior. But also number two, that can escalate behavior. If the stalker is being blocked at every turn, they will find very, very innovative ways of going beyond that. So that can increase a risk assessment. And again, that's understanding the dynamics between the client and the stalker. So there's really quite a bit to cover, but safety planning and evidence are really kind of intertwined with each other.
Okay. And what are the most common reactions that you see people experience when they first try to disclose their stalking experience? So you talked about maybe telling your employer or telling your friends and family. So when you work with clients, what do they tell you about what that experience is like?
The majority of people will receive support when they disclose their difficult appearance. However, there are times when the response is disbelief, or it could possibly be minimized. So for an example, if you've got somebody sending you constant flowers and constant chocolates and constant cards, one person might view that as very romantic. What they may not understand here again are the dynamics between the recipient and the perpetrator of these behaviors. So it can be very minimized, and that can be very damaging to a recipient of these behaviors, to a victim. It can stop them reaching out for further support, which could be very beneficial in the beginning. We know research has shown us that people tend not to disclose their stalking experience until the 100th incident, and that's 100 behaviors a person has gone through before they reach out. So it's
and that's 100 behaviors that they know about.
Yeah, that they know about. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So it's really important if somebody discloses to you, whether it's a friend, a colleague, or a family member, to believe them, to work from believing now, not from disbelief, prove it to me. Because yeah, this is just so incredibly important. Now, as far as police disclosures go, I find there are many clients who do not want to involve their family, their friends, or their colleagues, so they reach out to the police to begin with. Now, the majority of the police understand the risk and take these situations very seriously. They act immediately. If they can't act immediately, for an example, there's not enough evidence to take anything forward, then most of them are really, really good at guiding the victim of what to do, A, to keep safe, B, what evidence they would need to carry it forward. However, when we get certain situations, maybe a lack of training, where it's not being believed or it has been minimized, again, that's just as damaging as it coming from your family and friends. So we really, really urge to work from a belief perspective.
So you mentioned how damaging that was for people, and I know this is close to your heart because it's what your research is about. So tell us a bit about what the impact of a negative reaction is for people experiencing stalking when they try to tell someone.
Most importantly, negative reactions will extend the stalking episode. So if your family and your friends and the police are not behind you, chances are you're going to have to experience this for a year or two. For some clients, even more than that. I've seen it last up to 9 to 10 years for some people. So the impact of the psychological impact of this is extremely damaging. Paranoid ideation, you end up in a hyper arousal state that lasts indefinitely. That's extremely damaging on a person's mental health. It can result in depression, anxiety. You know, we see the majority of our clients are on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication because they're on constant alert of what's coming next, who's around the corner, when is this ever going to end, why won't anybody believe me? Their world gets so incredibly isolated that that impact is extremely, extremely damaging.
And what's the impact of, I guess, sort of a positive response if somebody gets it right and starts from belief when somebody tells them? What's the impact for the person experiencing stalking?
It's very empowering. It's very empowering for a victim of any crime, but particularly one as innocuous as stalking, to be believed. What that does is it gives a person strength. What it does is it allows then a team around them that can help them navigate this experience.
And can you explain, you talked a little bit about the dynamic between the stalker and the person experiencing stalking, and again, I think that's a term that we use but probably isn't commonly understood. So can you tell us a bit about what you mean by that?
When we're talking about the dynamics between a stalker and a victim, we're really talking about, it's very, very multifaceted. The term mostly applies to the relationship between the stalker and the victim. So is it a family situation? Is it personal? Were they dating? Is it an acquaintance? Is it a work colleague, or is it a complete stranger? We really need to understand that in order to understand risk factors. Most importantly as well in our interaction with our clients is understanding the interplay between the stalker and the victim. And that's a great part of the dynamic that we consider. So for an example, you may have left a 30-year marriage, and the person conducting the stalking behavior has had their whole world crumble. They may have lost their family, their home, whichever. And depending on how they interact with each other, that can worsen the situation and create a stalking scenario, or completely diffuse the situation. And that, in that context, it's really very important that we understand what communication is happening between them, who's saying what, how are we saying, are they responding? Because one of our biggest pieces of advice to give is not to respond to stalking behavior. So, you know, this communication the stalker gives to the victim as well is just as important, because you can receive a card through the door that any one person can read and it looks really lovely. However, maybe there's a relationship between the two and things were said within the relationship, threats, warnings, whichever that may be, that are embedded in the messages, in these emails, in these cards, in these text messages, that only the victim will understand. So again, that's a part of the dynamic and the communication that we need to understand. So what we do is we communicate with our clients how important it is to unpack this dynamic and to understand what is happening, and in particularly responses the victim can give to avoid any escalation of the behavior.
And what would you say? So let's imagine a client for a moment and think about, so they've come to us, we've talked that all through with them, they've started to feel empowered, they've reported it to the police have investigated, charged the person, and now it's time and they're going to go to court. So what would you talk through with someone who's concerned about kind of facing the person who's been stalking them in court, and what that experience is going to be like, and how it's going to happen, and how will they be kept safe in court?
In court, right. So that's where it's really important that the victim communicates with Procurator Fiscal and the VIA office, which is a part of a Procurator Fiscal office. When it comes to crimes of stalking, if they've been charged with a Section 39 stalking charge, the Procurator Fiscal's office automatically deems the victim as vulnerable because of the type of case, because it falls under domestic abuse. So with that, they are automatically granted special measures. And special measures means a Victim Support Scotland volunteer will be with them as they're giving their evidence. There will be a screen put between the victim and the perpetrator in the courtroom so that they cannot look directly. But what I tend to do is I tend to also prepare the victim that the perpetrator, the accused, will see them on a screen. There is a video camera on them, and most find that very shocking. They're not prepared for that. So I think that's a really important topic that I cover. The more prepared a person is, the less anxiety is going to build in the run up to the trial. If a person has had zero contact with the criminal justice system, I also recommend contacting Victim Support Scotland. They can arrange a court familiarization visit ahead of time. So they'll show them the witness room that they'll be sitting in. They'll show them the actual courtroom. And I find if a victim can visualize what they're about to face, it really reduces anxiety. So we really do try to walk them through what is going to happen, what protection measures they have. And sometimes VIA, if it's deemed a high threat, they will allow side entry and side leaving into the courtroom.
And what advice would you give to someone? So imagine there's someone watching this who's thinking, now you've explained that the individual behaviours don't have to be illegal and that it's a course of conduct. I'm reflecting on what's been happening to me, and I think maybe I am being stalked, but I'm not ready to reach out for advice or support yet. What would you want to leave them with as things to focus on right now, things that they can do now to take control of their situation?
Right. Well, what I would do is maybe to try to understand, if you know who the person is, that right there can help. You know your relationship with the person, if that is the case. And you also know your own gut instinct. If an instinct is telling you that something is not right, chances are it's not. So there's enough research and there's enough information on the Action Against Stalking website to go in and have a look and have a read. There are many steps you can take without having to go through the criminal justice system. Not everybody wants to take things to that level, and that is perfectly okay. We will support no matter what decision a person makes. We'll be there to help support them. So I think it's really just to understand, are you safe? What sort of safety planning can you do? Again, personal alarms, keeping your phone on record, and also anything that you do receive that could be evidence, keep it, tuck it away, and have a diary and log it. In case things change, in case the situation changes and you do end up needing to reach out for formal support. However, there are charities like ourselves that are more than willing to listen, and just listen if that's what you're needing.
And that's all my questions.
Well, thank you very much.
And well done.